The battlefield shakes as thousands of legionnaires advance in perfect formation. Arrows glance off massive shields, javelins strike before the enemy can react, and short swords find their mark with deadly precision. This was the power of Roman ingenuity. 7 revolutionary weapons turned ordinary soldiers into an unstoppable force, changing the very nature of warfare. By the end, you'll understand why Rome didn't just fight battles, it redefined them. If you want to uncover the secrets of history, hit like, subscribe, and share. Let's explore the weapons that made Rome invincible. The gladius, a weapon that struck fear into the hearts of enemies and forever changed the way battles were fought. It wasn't the biggest or the flashiest weapon, but its effectiveness in the hands of a Roman legionnaire was unparalleled. What made this short sword so revolutionary, and how did it give Rome an edge over its enemies? The gladius wasn't just a sword. It was the product of Roman military innovation, designed specifically for the tight, close-quarters combat that was common in Roman battle formations. Its origins trace back to Celtic models, but the Romans made it their own, compact, deadly, and efficient. Unlike the long swords carried by their enemies, the gladius had a blade length of around 60-75 centimeters, making it perfectly suited for quick, piercing strikes rather than wide slashes. This made it the ideal weapon for the disciplined, highly organized Roman legions. When you picture a Roman soldier, you probably imagine them in a tight formation, shields raised and spears ready. But the true power of the Roman military didn't just lie in their shields or their formations. It was in the gladius. In a Roman unit, soldiers didn't swing their swords wildly. They used their gladi to deliver rapid, precise thrusts that could pierce armor, shields, and flesh with ease. The advantage of the gladius wasn't in its length or weight, but in the way it allowed the soldier to fight efficiently in close formation, where there wasn't room for big swings, and it worked incredibly well. Roman soldiers trained relentlessly with the gladius, practicing every movement until it became second nature. The design was simple but effective. A short blade with a sharp point, a solid hilt, and a pommel that acted as a counterweight to the blade. This made the gladius easy to handle, even in the chaos of battle, ensuring that the soldier could strike quickly and move into another position with minimal effort. Roman training was brutal and precise. New recruits spent months learning how to wield the gladius, striking wooden dummies stuffed with straw to perfect their thrusts. Every motion had to be instinctive. Every strike had to be sharp, because in battle, seconds mattered. One misstep could be the difference between life and death. Roman soldiers didn't just learn how to fight, they learned how to fight in unison, making them a cohesive unit. And when they came together as a unit, the power of the gladius became even more devastating. But it wasn't just about the weapon itself. It was about how the Roman legions used it. Roman soldiers weren't fighting solo. They fought as part of a highly organized, well-coordinated unit. This made the gladius even more lethal. When hundreds of Roman soldiers stood side by side, shields raised, their gladi struck together in quick, precise movements that left little chance for the enemy to react. The psychological impact of the gladius was just as powerful as its physical one. Imagine facing a disciplined line of soldiers, each one trained to strike with surgical precision, all moving together as one. The Romans didn't need to rely on brute strength. They relied on strategy, coordination, and the devastating effectiveness of their weapons. To their enemies, the gladius was a nightmare they couldn't avoid. The Romans didn't just use one type of gladius. There were several variations designed for different combat situations. The gladius hispaniensis, for example, had a longer blade and was ideal for fighting in open formations. The Pompei was a later version, shorter and straighter, designed for tight, close-quarters combat. The Spada, an even longer version, was introduced in the 3rd century AD for use by cavalry and gradually replaced the gladius in later years. The mass production of gladi was another key factor in Rome's military superiority. Roman blacksmiths churned out thousands of these swords, ensuring that the legions were always equipped with identical, high-quality weapons. This standardization was vital for the Romans. Each soldier had the same equipment, which meant that every soldier could fight with the same level of effectiveness, whether they were in the front lines or in the back. The production process of a gladius was meticulous. Each sword was carefully forged by skilled blacksmiths who used advanced techniques for the time. The metal was carefully shaped, ensuring that the sword was both flexible and durable. The blade was hardened on the edges for sharpness, while the center remained soft to absorb stress without breaking. Each gladius was a work of precision, requiring hours of work to perfect. This attention to detail made the gladius one of the most reliable weapons of its time. Roman engineers and blacksmiths were masters of their craft. They knew that every detail mattered, from the way the blade was shaped to how the sword was balanced in the hand. The hilt was designed for a firm grip. The pommel acted as a counterweight to ensure quick, precise strikes, and the scabbard, made of wood and leather, was designed for easy access during combat. It was all about efficiency, and every aspect of the gladius was built for maximum effectiveness. But the gladius wasn't just about the weapon itself, it was about how the Romans fought. They didn't rely on the same methods of combat as their enemies. While barbarian armies fought with wide swings of their swords, Roman soldiers used their gladi to deliver short, powerful thrusts in close formation. This made the gladius the ideal weapon for the Roman military, where precision and coordination were the keys to success. In battle, the gladius was a weapon of fear. Enemies weren't just fighting against a soldier, they were fighting against an entire system. The gladius, when used in combination with Roman tactics, made the Roman legions nearly unstoppable. It turned the Roman soldier from an individual fighter into part of a cohesive, well-oiled machine. So, what made the gladius so effective? It was a combination of design, training, and tactics. The short, sharp blade allowed for quick, deadly strikes, while the Roman legions used precise formations to overwhelm their enemies. Together, the two created a weapon that was far more effective than anything used by the barbarians or other civilizations of the time. When it comes to ancient weaponry, it's easy to think of swords and shields as the main tools of war. But what if the real key to Roman success wasn't the sword at all? What if it was the javelin? More specifically, the pilum, a weapon so cleverly designed that it didn't just break through armor, it rendered the enemy's entire defense useless. The pilum wasn't just a spear, it was a tool of disruption. It was a carefully crafted weapon that served two key purposes: to pierce the enemy's shield and to neutralize their ability to fight. But how did it work? And what made it so incredibly effective? First, let's talk about design. The pilum had a unique structure that set it apart from other javelins. It was about 2 meters long, with a wooden shaft that made up most of its length. The metal tip, typically around 80 cm, was designed to penetrate shields and armor with terrifying ease. However, what really made the pilum stand out was the narrow, flexible neck of the weapon. This ingenious feature meant that when the pilum struck a shield, the metal neck would bend, rendering the weapon virtually useless to the enemy. Now, think about that for a second. You're an enemy soldier, standing ready with your shield raised. You see a javelin coming your way, a sharp, dangerous projectile aimed right at you. But then, the moment it strikes, the tip bends and locks into your shield. Your shield is no longer useful. In fact, it's now a liability, heavy and impossible to use effectively. The psychological effect of this was profound. Soldiers who relied on their shields suddenly found themselves without one, and it completely broke their morale. The Romans understood the importance of psychological warfare. They knew that if they could destroy the enemy's confidence before the battle even began, half the victory was already theirs. The pilum did just that. It made sure that the enemy wasn't just physically defeated but mentally crippled. As soon as the pilum struck, it forced the enemy to discard their shields, leaving them vulnerable to the next wave of Roman attacks. But the pilum wasn't just effective at breaking shields. It was also a weapon of incredible range and precision. Roman soldiers didn't throw their javelins aimlessly. They used them strategically, firing them in unison at a specific target, often from a distance of 15 to 20 meters. This was the optimal range for a pilum, where its penetration power was at its peak. At that distance, the pilum was almost guaranteed to hit its mark, and it would either pierce the shield, injure the soldier behind it, or both. The pilum wasn't just a one-hit wonder. Roman soldiers carried multiple javelins into battle, usually two types, a light pilum and a heavy pilum. The light pilum was designed for throwing at longer distances, perfect for softening up the enemy before the Romans closed in for close combat. The heavier version, weighing over 2 kilo, was for maximum penetration power at close range. In battle, this system allowed the Romans to first weaken the enemy with light javelins, then follow up with the heavier pilum, which would often break through the shields and armor, creating chaos in the enemy ranks. As the enemy struggled to cope with their destroyed defenses, the Romans would move in quickly with their gladi, ready to finish the fight in close quarters. The pilum was also designed with efficiency in mind. It was relatively simple to make, and the Romans mass-produced them in vast quantities, ensuring that every legionnaire was properly equipped. Roman arsenals churned out pili at an astonishing rate, and the standardization of these weapons made it easier to resupply soldiers during long campaigns. Each soldier would carry multiple pili, making sure they had the right tool for every situation, whether they were on the offensive or the defensive. What's fascinating about the pilum is its legacy. It was a weapon of tactical brilliance, and its principles didn't die with the fall of the Roman Empire. The idea of a one-use weapon that effectively neutralizes the enemy's defense has influenced military tactics for centuries. From the development of more modern throwing weapons to the concept of disruption in contemporary warfare, the pilum was ahead of its time. The design of the pilum was so clever that it could not easily be turned against its creators. Once it bent and got stuck in the enemy's shield, it was almost impossible to retrieve. This meant that the pilum was a one-time use weapon, but that didn't diminish its importance. The Romans understood the value of a well-placed one-use weapon, knowing that the enemy's loss of defense was worth much more than the cost of the weapon itself. Another important aspect of the pilum was its training. Roman soldiers weren't just handed a javelin and told to throw it. They were trained extensively in the art of javelin throwing, learning how to aim, how to throw with maximum power, and how to coordinate with their fellow soldiers. The Roman army's emphasis on training and discipline was key to the success of the pilum. When thousands of soldiers threw their javelins in unison, it wasn't just a random barrage, it was a coordinated, devastating assault that left the enemy disorganized and vulnerable. It's easy to overlook the importance of the pilum in Rome's military success. After all, it wasn't a sword or a siege weapon, and it didn't have the same iconic status as the gladius or the ballista. But the pilum was, in many ways, the perfect complement to those weapons. It softened up the enemy before the Romans ever got close enough to use their swords. It broke through defenses and left the enemy unarmed and vulnerable. And perhaps most importantly, it played a key role in the psychological warfare that made the Roman legions so effective. In the grand scheme of Roman military technology, the pilum may not be the most famous weapon, but it was undoubtedly one of the most important. It was a weapon designed for the specific purpose of making the enemy's defenses crumble, and it did that job better than anything else in its class. If there's one thing that defined the Roman legions, it was their ability to fight as a unified, disciplined force. But this level of coordination and strength didn't come naturally. It was the result of a careful balance of tactics and weaponry. One weapon that played a huge part in this was the scutum, a massive, rectangular shield that transformed soldiers from individuals into an unbreakable, mobile fortress. At first glance, the scutum might seem like just another shield, but to call it just a shield is like calling the Roman legions just an army. The scutum was so much more than that. It was the foundation of Roman military success. The size alone was enough to intimidate any enemy. Standing at about 120 cm tall and 75 cm wide, the scutum covered almost the entire body of a soldier, from head to knee, leaving very little exposed. It was big enough to protect a soldier from arrows, slashes, and even the heavier blows from enemy weapons. What made the scutum so effective wasn't just its size, but its design. Roman engineers didn't just make a big shield, they created one that was both strong and lightweight. The scutum was made by layering thin slats of wood, glued together, and then covered with leather. This combination of materials gave it strength without making it too heavy. The shield was also reinforced with metal along the edges and featured a central boss, a convex metal piece in the center, which could be used as a battering ram during combat. But the scutum wasn't just for defense, it was designed to be used as a weapon in its own right. The Romans were known for their ability to use their shields not just to block, but to strike. With its metal boss and large surface area, the scutum could deliver powerful blows to an opponent. When used correctly, a soldier could use the shield to knock an enemy off balance, break their guard, or even knock them to the ground. The true genius of the scutum, however, came in how it was used in formation. Roman soldiers didn't fight as individuals. They fought as part of a tightly coordinated unit. The scutum was the key to this strategy. When the Roman legions formed their famous battle formations, The scutum became an integral part of the defense. Soldiers would stand shoulder to shoulder, their shields raised in front of them, creating an almost impenetrable wall of protection. This defensive formation was not only formidable, it was flexible. The scutum allowed soldiers to fight in tight formations, where every soldier protected the one beside them. When the Romans fought in these formations, they were an unstoppable force. Each individual soldier became a part of a greater whole, and the scutum was the key to making that happen. One of the most famous formations that utilized the scutum was the testudo, or tortoise formation. In this tactic, soldiers would line up in close formation, their shields raised in front and on the sides, and then their shields would be raised above their heads to form an almost impenetrable dome. This made the Roman legions nearly invulnerable to enemy missiles, whether they were arrows, javelins, or stones. The testudo allowed the Romans to advance steadily toward the enemy, protected from all sides, until they reached their objective. The tactical value of the scutum cannot be overstated. The shield was the key to the Roman way of fighting. It wasn't just a passive form of protection, it was part of the strategy. Soldiers with their scutums in formation could advance with confidence, knowing that they were shielded from almost every type of attack. This made the Roman army a force to be reckoned with, and the scutum was the cornerstone of that power. The psychological impact of the scutum was also significant. When enemies saw the Roman legions advancing with their massive shielded ranks, it sent a clear message. The Romans were a force to be reckoned with, and their soldiers were protected, disciplined, and unyielding. This visual representation of Roman strength was often enough to break the spirit of enemy forces before the battle even began. The design of the scutum also allowed for unique tactical flexibility. Roman soldiers could use their shields to create formations like the testudo, but they could also use them to create a defensive wall that protected the soldiers from projectiles, while still leaving room for them to fight with their gladius in close quarters. The scutum allowed the Romans to adapt to a variety of combat scenarios, from large-scale battles to sieges to smaller skirmishes. Training with the scutum was a vital part of a Roman soldier's preparation. New recruits weren't just taught to wield a sword. They were taught to wield their shields with just as much skill. The scutum was so integral to Roman tactics that soldiers practiced with it every day, learning how to move in formation, how to use the shield to block and strike, and how to fight as part of a larger unit. A soldier who was skilled with his scutum was a soldier who could fight in perfect coordination with his comrades, creating a solid wall of defense that could crush anything in its path. The production of the scutum was just as efficient as its use in battle. Roman armories produced these shields in large quantities, ensuring that every soldier in the legions was equipped with the same high-quality weaponry. The consistency of design and production meant that soldiers could count on their shields being reliable in battle, and it ensured that every Roman soldier was armed with the same equipment, making them a uniform and highly effective force. But the scutum didn't just make the Roman legions a formidable fighting force. It also played a role in the logistics of warfare. The size and durability of the shield meant that it could be used as a portable defense during long marches, protecting soldiers from the elements and from enemy attacks. The scutum became a soldier's mobile fortress, capable of turning any battlefield into a place where the Roman army was in control. Ultimately, the scutum was a symbol of Roman military superiority. It wasn't just a piece of equipment. It was a reflection of the discipline, organization, and strategic thinking that made the Roman legions the most formidable military force the world had ever seen. The scutum allowed Roman soldiers to fight as a unified force, turning individual soldiers into part of an unstoppable, cohesive unit. Without the scutum, the Roman legions would not have been the same. And without it, Rome may never have built the empire that stretched across continents. In the ancient world, warfare was often dominated by brute force. Armies clashed in hand-to-hand combat, with swords and shields leading the charge. But what if the key to success wasn't just close combat? What if it was the ability to strike from a distance with such precision and power that the enemy could never escape? Enter the ballista, an ancient siege engine that redefined the very nature of ranged combat. Imagine being on the battlefield, facing not just rows of soldiers but also towering machines capable of hurling massive projectiles with deadly accuracy. The ballista was no ordinary weapon. It was a torsion-powered artillery device that acted like the ancient world's equivalent of a sniper rifle. What made it so remarkable wasn't just its sheer power, it was its precision. At its core, the ballista was a giant crossbow. Powered by twisted ropes or animal tendons that stored tremendous amounts of energy, it used this force to launch bolts or even large stones across great distances. The idea was simple. Build a machine that could harness the power of twisted fibers to propel projectiles with devastating force. The result? A weapon that could accurately hit targets at hundreds of meters away. What set the ballista apart from other siege weapons was its ability to hit specific targets with pinpoint accuracy. Unlike the catapult, which was designed to launch large projectiles over a wide area, the ballista was designed to strike with precision. This made it perfect for targeting individual soldiers or enemy leaders, and it quickly became known as the ancient world's sniper rifle. Roman engineers were masters of mechanics, and the ballista was a testament to their skill. The torsion springs that powered the machine were made from twisted ropes, fibers, or even bundles of animal tendons. When the levers on the machine were pulled, the tension in the springs built up, and when released, it sent the projectile flying at high speed toward its target. The level of accuracy and force that could be generated by this simple yet powerful mechanism was unparalleled at the time. The ballista was used in a variety of ways. On the battlefield, it could be used to disrupt enemy formations, firing bolts that would pierce shields and armor from a distance. Its range and accuracy allowed Roman soldiers to strike at the enemy without ever having to engage them in close combat. This gave the Romans a significant advantage in battles, where they could wear down their enemies before ever getting close enough for a sword fight. In siege warfare, the ballista was just as effective. It could be used to target specific structures or individuals within enemy fortifications. Roman commanders would often use the ballista to target enemy officers or standard-bearers, knowing that the loss of a leader could cause confusion and chaos within enemy ranks. With a ballista, they could strike with deadly accuracy, taking out key targets and disrupting the enemy's ability to function as a cohesive unit. The ballista was also a weapon of fear. Just imagine the sight of a giant crossbow hurling bolts across the battlefield, each one capable of tearing through shields and armor with ease. The psychological effect of seeing these weapons in action was enough to make even the most seasoned soldiers think twice before advancing. But the ballista wasn't just a weapon of destruction. It was also a tool of engineering brilliance. Roman craftsmen put incredible effort into the design and construction of each ballista. The frame was made of wood, reinforced with metal components, and the torsion springs required precise calculation to ensure that they could store the right amount of energy. It was a weapon that required not just raw materials, but also skilled labor to assemble and maintain. The ballista was used in different forms depending on the situation. There were small portable models known as scorpions that could be carried and set up on the battlefield. These smaller versions were ideal for accurate shooting at medium-range targets. Then there were the massive stationary ballistas used during sieges. These versions were capable of launching large stones that could break through walls, towers, and fortifications, changing the course of a siege and allowing Roman forces to breach enemy defenses. Unlike other siege weapons, the ballista wasn't just about power, it was about finesse. The crew that operated a ballista required precision and coordination. It wasn't a simple matter of loading the machine and firing. Each shot had to be calculated carefully. The crew had to consider the wind, the distance, and the weight of the projectile. With these factors in mind, the ballista could accurately strike its target with devastating force. Training to operate the ballista was demanding. Soldiers didn't simply learn how to fire it. They learned how to calculate distance, how to adjust for wind, and how to load the machine quickly and safely. It took months of training to master the art of using the ballista, and only the most skilled soldiers were entrusted with these powerful machines. The precision required to make each shot count meant that every ballista crew was a tightly knit team, working together to ensure that every bolt found its mark. Roman engineers were also quick to adapt and improve upon their creations. As the Roman Empire expanded, new variations of the ballista were developed to meet different battlefield needs. Some had larger torsion springs to launch heavier projectiles, while others were designed for even greater range and accuracy. The ballista became an integral part of the Roman military, both on the battlefield and during sieges. and it was a weapon that set Rome apart from its enemies. The legacy of the ballista didn't end with the fall of the Roman Empire. The principles of torsion-powered artillery were carried forward into the medieval period, where they evolved into even more powerful machines, such as the trebuchet. The ballista proved that long-range artillery could be both precise and powerful, paving the way for future advancements in siege technology. In the end, the ballista was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of Roman engineering genius, a weapon that combined power and precision in a way that had never been seen before. It allowed the Romans to strike from a distance, eliminating threats before they ever got close enough to engage in close combat. It gave the Roman legions the ability to dominate the battlefield, not just through strength, but through the careful application of engineering, tactics, and precision. When it comes to warfare, it's often the tools of mass destruction that leave the biggest mark. And in the ancient world, there was no tool more destructive than the catapult. While the ballista struck with precision, the catapult was a weapon built to tear through fortifications, lay waste to structures, and break the will of the enemy. It wasn't just about hitting a target. It was about overwhelming the enemy with sheer power and force. The catapult wasn't a new idea. It was derived from earlier Greek siege engines, but the Romans took it to an entirely new level. What made the Roman catapult so effective wasn't just its power. It was the Romans' ability to refine and standardize its design, making it a weapon of mass destruction in the most literal sense. Imagine a machine capable of hurling massive stone projectiles with such force that they could collapse walls, destroy towers, and shatter enemy morale. That's exactly what the catapult did. Its power was unrivaled at the time, and its destructive potential changed the way sieges were fought. While other armies relied on battering rams or sheer manpower to break into enemy fortresses, the Romans used the catapult to launch stones weighing tens of kilograms, capable of pulverizing anything in their path. The design of the catapult was simple yet incredibly effective. It was a large wooden frame that housed a massive arm. This arm was powered by twisted ropes or fibers, which stored tension and allowed the arm to launch a stone or other projectiles with explosive power. When the tension was released, the arm swung forward with incredible force, sending the projectile flying. The Romans were experts in harnessing the power of tension, and their mastery of this principle gave them an edge in siege warfare. But the true brilliance of the catapult wasn't just in its size or power. It was in how it could be used to target specific structures or weaknesses in enemy defenses. Unlike earlier siege weapons, which were largely indiscriminate, the Roman catapult was a tool of precision destruction. Roman engineers developed different types of catapults, each designed for specific tasks, from tearing down walls to setting fire to wooden structures. Some were even capable of launching incendiary projectiles, which would explode upon impact, creating chaos and panic among the enemy. In siege warfare, the catapult became the Romans' most feared weapon. When attacking a city or fortress, the Romans would position their catapults just outside the reach of enemy archers or defenders. The catapults would then begin their relentless barrage, hurling massive stones or fiery projectiles at the walls, towers, and gates of the fortress. The sheer force of the catapult's projectiles often caused walls to crack and crumble, and once a breach was made, the Roman soldiers would flood in to complete the assault. What made the catapult so devastating in battle was its psychological effect. Imagine being inside a fortress, hearing the low rumble of a catapult being fired, followed by the thud of a massive stone smashing into your walls. The constant barrage from these weapons would demoralize the defenders, who knew that no matter how strong their walls were, the catapult would eventually break them down. The catapult was also incredibly effective at disrupting the enemy's ability to fight back. During a siege, the Romans would often position their catapults in such a way that they could destroy the enemy's defenses from a distance, without ever having to get close. This allowed the Romans to maintain the upper hand while keeping their own forces relatively safe from direct assault. The crew that operated the catapult had to be highly skilled. Unlike a ballista, which could be operated by a small crew, a catapult required a larger team to operate efficiently. The crew would consist of several men, one to aim the catapult, one to load the projectiles, and others to maintain the machine and ensure that it was firing at peak efficiency. Operating a catapult was a highly technical task, and it took months of training for soldiers to become proficient in its use. But once mastered, the catapult was a weapon that could change the course of a siege in a matter of hours. The production of catapults was an enormous undertaking. These machines were not easily built. They required skilled craftsmen and a lot of resources. Roman engineers used wood, metal, and ropes, ensuring that every part of the catapult was sturdy and reliable. The production process could take weeks, and each catapult was a work of engineering precision. Despite the difficulty of producing them, the Romans were able to create and deploy large numbers of catapults across their empire, making them an essential part of Roman military strategy. But the catapult wasn't just useful in sieges. It could also be used in open battles, where its range and power allowed the Romans to break enemy formations from a distance. In these situations, the catapult would fire massive stones into the ranks of the enemy, creating chaos and disarray. The Romans were masters of using their catapults to their advantage, and the threat of their heavy artillery was enough to make even the bravest enemies think twice. Over time, the catapult evolved. The Romans continued to improve their designs, making their machines more powerful, more accurate, and more versatile. Eventually, the catapult gave way to even larger and more advanced siege engines, but its legacy lived on in the principles of artillery that are still in use today. Modern artillery, from howitzers to cannons, traces its roots back to the Roman catapult. The catapult was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of Roman ingenuity. It wasn't simply about brute strength. It was about using technology and tactics to gain an advantage over the enemy. The catapult allowed the Romans to wage war from a distance, breaking down walls, fortifications, and even the morale of their enemies. It was a weapon that changed the course of history, paving the way for future advancements in siege warfare and artillery. While Roman weapons are often the first thing that comes to mind when thinking about their military superiority, there's an aspect of their military genius that often goes overlooked: their ability to quickly establish and maintain strongholds. Rome didn't just conquer through battle alone. It conquered through strategic innovation in logistics and camp construction. And at the heart of this logistical mastery was the castra, the standardized Roman field camp. Picture this. After a long march, the Roman legions stop for the night. What could have been a vulnerable moment, exposed to potential enemy ambush, turns into an opportunity for the Romans to solidify their position and prepare for the next day's fight. Within hours, the soldiers had transformed the surrounding land into a fully fortified camp, a castra that was secure, organized, and ready to withstand any attack. This ability to quickly turn any piece of land into an impregnable fortress was a game changer for the Romans. The genius of the castra wasn't just in its design, but in its speed and efficiency. The Roman army was a well-oiled machine, and every soldier knew their role in building the castra. The camp had to be organized, functional, and above all, secure. Every Roman soldier was issued tools like shovels, pickaxes, and saws to help construct the camp's defenses, and each soldier was expected to know exactly where to go and what to do. Building the castra began with digging a trench. The soldiers would dig a deep, wide ditch around the camp, about 1.5 meters deep and up to 3 meters wide. The earth that was dug out was then used to create a defensive embankment, forming the first layer of protection. This was the foundation of the castra, a ring of defense that could stop any immediate threat from surrounding enemies. After the trench and embankment were complete, the soldiers would erect a palisade of sharpened wooden stakes around the embankment to add an extra layer of defense. These stakes, placed closely together, created a wall that was difficult to climb or break through. At the same time, the Romans would set up their internal streets, dividing the camp into distinct sections where soldiers could sleep, eat, and prepare for battle. The commander's tent, known as the praetorium, was placed in the center of the camp, and from there, the entire operation was managed. The Roman castra was designed for maximum efficiency, both in terms of defense and organization. Every part of the camp had a specific purpose, and every soldier had a role to play. The camp's layout followed a strict, standardized pattern, with streets radiating out from the praetorium and sections assigned for each unit. This level of organization allowed the Romans to function seamlessly, no matter where they were in the world. But what made the castra even more remarkable was its flexibility. Roman legions didn't just rely on castra for defense. They were designed to be mobile. Each castra was built to last, but it was also built to be dismantled and rebuilt quickly when necessary. If the Roman legions needed to move, they could leave no trace behind, or at least minimal disruption. The soldiers could pack up their camp, take it down, and set it up again somewhere else with speed and efficiency that few other armies could match. This gave the Roman army unparalleled mobility. They could march into enemy territory, establish a fortified position, and then move on when the time was right, all within the span of a few days. What made the castra so effective wasn't just its ability to protect the Romans. It was its ability to provide everything a legion needed for a prolonged stay. Inside the camp, there were kitchens, workshops, medical tents, stables, and storage rooms for food, weapons, and supplies. The castra was a self-sufficient fortress, capable of housing an entire legion for weeks, if necessary. This logistical support allowed the Roman legions to operate far from Rome, deep in enemy territory, without relying on local resources. The Romans didn't just conquer land, they secured it with the infrastructure needed to hold it. The castra also had a psychological effect on the enemy. When the Romans established a camp, it wasn't just a place to rest, it was a statement of intent. The Romans weren't just passing through, they were here to stay. The sight of a well-organized, fortified castra would send a clear message. The Romans were ready for anything, and they had the means to defend themselves and hold their position indefinitely. It was a declaration of control, and more often than not, it was a declaration that their enemies would soon be overwhelmed. Another key feature of the castra was the vallum, a rampart or mound that surrounded the camp. This mound served both a defensive and practical purpose, allowing the Romans to monitor the surrounding terrain from a higher vantage point. The vallum could also be used to block any potential attackers from gaining access to the camp. The addition of the vallum made the castra even more secure and harder to breach. Training was crucial in the construction of the castra. Roman soldiers were taught not only how to fight, but how to build and maintain their camps. Each soldier knew his role in the construction, ensuring that the camp could be established quickly and without confusion. In fact, the speed at which a castra could be built was a testament to the training and discipline of the Roman legions. What other armies would take days or weeks to construct, the Romans could accomplish in a matter of hours. The castra also had a profound impact on Roman tactics. Because they could establish fortified camps quickly, the Romans could keep their soldiers well rested and organized, ready for battle at a moment's notice. This gave them the ability to fight efficiently, whether on the move or in defensive positions, and to outlast their enemies in ways that others simply couldn't match. The legacy of the castra didn't end with the fall of Rome. The principles behind the castra, organization, mobility, and self-sufficiency, influenced military strategies and camp construction for centuries to come. In fact, many modern military bases and field camps still follow similar principles, designed for efficiency and rapid deployment. The Roman castra wasn't just a military innovation. It was a lasting symbol of Roman discipline, ingenuity, and their unmatched ability to conquer and hold vast territories. When the Roman legions marched into battle, they didn't just fight as individuals. They fought as a unified force, a singular entity working in perfect harmony. This unity was at the core of Roman military power, and it was embodied in one of the most iconic formations in military history, the testudo, or tortoise formation. The testudo wasn't just a battle tactic. It was a living, breathing fortress, a formation so formidable that it could withstand the heaviest barrage of arrows, javelins, and even stones. Imagine a giant moving wall of shields, each Roman soldier standing shoulder to shoulder, with their shields raised in front and above, forming an impenetrable dome. The testudo was the epitome of Roman discipline, coordination, and strategic brilliance. At its core, the testudo was about protection. The formation was designed to allow the Romans to advance safely toward enemy fortifications, while being completely shielded from projectiles. Roman soldiers, each holding their scutum shields, would line up closely together, creating a nearly unbreakable wall of defense. The front row would raise their shields vertically, while those in the rear and on the sides would hold their shields above their heads, effectively creating a roof. This was a defensive formation that left almost no gaps, making it impossible for arrows or thrown weapons to penetrate. The testudo was the ultimate display of Roman military unity. The soldiers had to act as a single entity, moving together with precision, step by step. Any deviation in coordination could lead to a breach in the formation, rendering it ineffective. But when executed correctly, the testudo was nearly invulnerable. No matter how many arrows rained down from above, no matter how many stones were thrown from the enemy's walls, the testudo held firm, advancing steadily towards its goal. It's easy to see how the testudo could intimidate enemy forces. Imagine hundreds, even thousands, of Roman soldiers moving forward, their shields held high in perfect unison, advancing like a giant, impenetrable wall. It was a sight that would strike fear into the hearts of any enemy who had never seen such a thing before. The testudo wasn't just a formation. It was a psychological weapon, a way of showing the enemy that no matter what they threw at the Romans, it would not stop them. But the testudo wasn't just about defense. It was also about advancing under heavy fire. When Roman soldiers used this formation, they weren't just standing still and waiting to be attacked. They were actively advancing towards the enemy, preparing to breach their defenses. This made the testudo incredibly effective in siege warfare, where the Romans could approach enemy walls or fortifications with little fear of the arrows or stones that might be thrown at them. The formation allowed them to move quickly, get in close, and launch their final assault with a high level of protection. The testudo had another key advantage. It allowed the Romans to fight as one. In the chaos of battle, it's easy for soldiers to become disoriented or act as individuals. But in the testudo formation, there was no room for individualism. Every soldier relied on the others to maintain the shield wall and stay in formation. This unity made the Roman legions more cohesive, more organized, and far more effective than their enemies. However, despite its formidable defensive power, the testudo wasn't without its weaknesses. The formation was slow, limiting the Romans' ability to maneuver quickly. This made the testudo most effective in situations where speed wasn't crucial, such as sieging a fortress or when advancing in a battle with overwhelming numbers. The testudo could also become vulnerable from the sides or rear, where the shields were less effective. But these weaknesses were known to Roman commanders, who would adapt their tactics accordingly, using the testudo in the right situations and with the right support. To form the testudo required exceptional training and discipline. Roman soldiers didn't just learn how to hold a shield, they learned how to fight as part of a massive unit. Training involved hours of practice, learning how to coordinate movements, and perfecting the timing of each soldier's actions. They didn't just train to be warriors, they trained to be part of something much bigger than themselves. And the testudo was the ultimate test of this unity. The testudo was a testament to Roman military discipline. It wasn't just about brute strength or individual prowess. It was about teamwork and precision. Each soldier had to trust the man beside him, and in turn, the strength of the formation relied on each soldier's commitment to the whole. The testudo made the Roman legions more than just an army. It made them a force of nature, unstoppable and precise. While the testudo was most famously used by the Roman infantry, it wasn't limited to land battles. The Romans were known for adapting their tactics to various situations, and the testudo was used in different forms depending on the battle. For example, it could be used in smaller numbers to infiltrate enemy lines or to protect soldiers as they moved in close to enemy fortifications. In naval battles, Roman soldiers would sometimes employ a similar formation using their ships as shields to protect them from enemy projectiles. The influence of the testudo extended far beyond the Roman Empire. It was a tactic that inspired military formations for centuries to come. The concept of a defensive wall of soldiers moving in unison would be adapted by countless armies throughout history. Even modern military units use formations inspired by the testudo, relying on tightly coordinated movements to ensure maximum protection for their troops. The idea of fighting as a single unit, where each soldier is both a protector and protected, is a concept that still resonates today. But it wasn't just about the testudo itself. It was about the Roman mindset. The testudo reflected the Roman approach to warfare, methodical, disciplined, and unified. It wasn't about one soldier being the hero. It was about the entire army working as one to accomplish the mission. And this mentality is what made the Roman legions so successful. They didn't fight like individuals. They fought like a single powerful force. The testudo was more than just a battle formation. It was a symbol of Roman military superiority. It was the physical embodiment of Roman discipline, teamwork, and strategy. And when it was employed on the battlefield, it often meant victory was inevitable. For the Romans, the testudo wasn't just a tactic, it was the key to their success in war.